Hello, my name's Adrian Goldberg and welcome to the Byline Times podcast. The Byline Times is what the papers don't say, what radio doesn't report and what telly doesn't tell you. This time, Saudi sportswashing 1, human rights 0. We're reflecting on Newcastle United's hopes of winning their first major domestic trophy in 68 years when they play Manchester United in the Carabao Cup Final. The Geordies, or the Toon as they are known to their fans, have had a dramatic upturn in their fortunes since being bought by the Saudi Public Investment Fund in October 2021. The takeover was controversial because the chair of the PIF is Saudi's de facto ruler, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS. But the Premier League accepted legally binding assurances that the state would not control the club. Not everyone is convinced, though, and Amnesty International have accused Saudi Arabia of using Newcastle to sportswash their dismal human rights record, citing the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, as well as censorship, unfair trials and travel bans on activists. Then there's the death sentence. The day before the match between Newcastle and Chelsea last March, 81 people were executed, including men who were children at the time of their offences. On Tyneside, the Saudis have generally been warmly welcomed for what they've done for the club, but not everyone is impressed. Lifelong Newcastle fan John Hurd of No Saudi Toon has delivered a letter to the club asking manager Eddie Howe to speak up for the brother of an activist who faces the threat of execution in Saudi Arabia. John has been telling me about his campaign.
Our campaign's been going on for over a year, well, probably 18 months now. And we started off with a small number of people, got a social media profile. But as it's gone on, time's gone on, we've got more people to support the campaign. And during the campaigning, we were contacted by a group of Saudi human rights activists called the European Human Rights Organization for Saudi Human Rights in Germany. They said they supported what we're doing, they liked what we're doing. So we've collaborated with them. They've been giving us information, and we attended a human rights conference that they held, and they actually advised us about the protests we did at St James's Park when we played Chelsea. Basically 8 children who were young Saudis who were arrested when they were kids, who the regime played cat and mouse with them, rearrested them, let them out, persecuted their families, and now they're on death row. You know, it's actually internationally, even Saudi Arabia says they don't execute children, but in effect they do, you know, so they're actually on death row at the moment. So they told us that, obviously football is very popular in Saudi Arabia. It's interesting that the sports washing is not just like for outside, it's also, internal. MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, likes to let people know that he's got a football club. You know, it's completely different, the narrative inside Saudi Arabia. The regime says it's their club, they'll do what they want with it, But obviously it's for internal consumption as well. So the Saudi Human Rights Organization told us that there was a young guy called Hassan who's escaped because his family escaped from Saudi Arabia. He's from the Shia minority and from the sort of eastern province. And he escaped because his brothers and his family were being persecuted, and he knew that he was going to be arrested. So he was traveling around. Anyway, he was in Marrakesh, and he was arrested. And even though there was a lot of pressure put on the Moroccan government not to do it, including Amnesty and other human rights groups, Reprieve as well, tried to stop him being sent back to Saudi Arabia. Well, he did. He was sent back. And anyway, his brother Ahmed got in touch and wrote a letter, and the letter is a really powerful letter, and he puts everything in context and on the table. Basically what he says is, okay, we know you, Eddie Howe, and the players, we know that you don't support human rights abuses or my brother being executed. He says, but what are you going to do about it? What are you going to say? Because you can see from the letter that obviously the young Saudis follow football very closely, I think that point is very, very powerful. He says, look, in the letter, he says, if you don't say something now, especially Newcastle going to be in the final, all eyes will be on Newcastle in the Carabao Cup Final, the League Cup Final. He says, now's the time to say something. And he ends the letter by saying, if not now, then when? And we thought, okay, we should deliver it to Eddie Howe. I don't think that Eddie Howe would sort of disagree with anything in the letter, but the proof for the pudding is he going to say something? Why can't he say something? That's the point that we're getting across. What's wrong with people like Alan Shearer, who actually said there were concerns when the takeover went through? He said there were concerns on the BBC. Why can't they speak up for these young guys who are on death row? It's a simple question. We are a minority voice, we know, but still optimistic that the majority of Newcastle fans are against the human rights abuses that the 80% owners of the club are carrying out in Saudi Arabia. Okay, that's a given. Well, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to say something? Are we going to use our position? One of the things that we've taken up with fans groups and also the fanzines, they're on record as saying before the takeover, the NUST said when they were interviewed, they said that they would exist to be critical friend to the new owners. The group called War Flags, which is brilliant displays at every match. One of the people who works with them actually said, if we felt that Saudi women were being persecuted, we would consider doing a flag display with a Saudi woman in a Newcastle shirt. Okay, well, we come back to NUST and War Flags and say, well, Saudi women are being persecuted. Salma al-Shabab, Nora al-Qatani, 34, 45 years in prison for tweeting, which we do all the time, and we take it for granted. But these women have been basically banged up for the rest of their lives in prison. It's terrible, terrible situation, just for very light criticism of the regime. Time's running out. There's 61 executions pending. As a fan, it's obviously we're pulled both ways. The team's in a final. They're playing Manchester United. Everybody will be looking at that. And the thing you pick up from other fans is, and I think it's legitimate what fans of other clubs are saying about this, what they're saying is, well, if you win, is there any glory in winning with this money? Newcastle have spent a lot of money, and the money comes from Saudi Arabia. It comes from the dictatorship. I think the only way to avoid criticism if Newcastle win is if some key people say something before the cup final, make it clear that they don't agree with what the owners are doing in Saudi Arabia. A lot of fans just are totally pessimistic about what they can do. They're actually saying, well, what difference does it make? Eddie saying something won't make any difference. The word we get from Ahmed, who wrote the letter on behalf of his brother, what we get from Saudi human rights activists is you have to speak up. He said, if someone like Eddie Howe spoke up, or Alan Shearer, or even a player, or some of the celebrity supporters, but ordinary fans as well, War Flags did something at the final. If they did something, that would get back to MBS. They hate criticism. That's the whole point of sports washing. The whole point is to not think about and to look the other way as regards the gross human rights violations they're doing in Saudi Arabia. Honestly, we haven't had a satisfactory answer from anyone around the fanzines and around the fans groups as why can't they say something? Say something now. What's the problem with saying something?
And the argument has always been from the Saudi side that the Public Investment Fund, the PIF, that owns Newcastle United, is separate from the government of Mohammed bin Salman, MBS.
Yeah. Well, do you think anyone really believes it anymore? At the beginning, that was like a big argument that we had in a discussion. The Evening Chronicle, which is the Northeast main paper, has played a terrible role. They've actually highlighted when Saudi dignitaries attend. They say, such and such is attend. There was a round of applause for such and such. And then you look at the names of these people. One of our guys in the campaign researched who the people are. Some of these people are, famous torturers. They're absolutely terrible people who we shouldn't be applauding them when they come to the ground. They're linked with the regime. Now, for example, the chair of the 80% of the board of the owners is a governor of the PIF. He was handpicked by bin Salman. Perhaps people don't want to think about it, but how do things run in a dictatorship? The dictators run things, and the lead dictator is MBS. It was set up, the PIF was set up by royal decree. It's still controlled by the royal family. Interestingly, True Faith, the sort of main Newcastle fanzine, they were arguing with us at the beginning, no, it's separate, blah, blah, blah. They published an article last week saying, we're owned by the Saudi state. So there's like an acceptance now that it is the Saudi state. As we sort of predicted, as time went on, people would just say, well, it is the Saudi state. And obviously, this is not just a question for Newcastle. Now we've got, Manchester United, rumours about Liverpool. We're at a stage now where basically you could get Middle Eastern states having like a type of football arms race between themselves. We're getting a lot of support from fans of other clubs. It's not jealousy. It's not because people wish badly of Newcastle fans. It's because a lot of fans are waking up now of other clubs and thinking, this is not what we want. You probably saw the joint statement between MUST, the Manchester United fans group, and Spirit of Shankly, which is brilliant. The big rivalry between the clubs, but they actually put on the table, we're not happy with states owning clubs. And the thing is, the Saudi state owns Newcastle United. It's clear. It's clear. And that was a massive mistake by the Premier League. And I think probably they're regretting it now, because if the Saudi state can own it, well, Qatar can own, any other state that wants to come in, So I think that's going to be a big issue. And unfortunately for fellow Newcastle fans, we said right at the beginning, don't get too used to this money. Don't get used to it, because things can change. I think there's a head of steam now starting amongst, grassroots fans, organisations, that they say, we've had enough. We've had enough of like these states coming in. And I think any state, I don't just mean the Saudi state, but especially because of their human rights abuses, or the Middle Eastern regimes who, have got terrible record on human rights. But I wouldn't be against the United States owning a club. I'd be against China. I'd be against Iran. Any state really hasn't any business owning a football club,
To pick up on that point, you've got owners of football clubs who may represent states like the Abu Dhabi royal family at Manchester City.
Yeah, they're very clever, aren't they?
And you may have individuals like Roman Abramovich, who was the owner of Chelsea for many years, who had links to Vladimir Putin, who, if anyone was in any doubt before, we now know is a cruel fascist tyrant, really. So there have been plenty of disreputable people, or people with, at the very least, highly questionable owning football clubs. But there's something about the Saudis that goes beyond that. Mohammed bin Salman himself was implicated, according to US state intelligence reports, in the state-sponsored killing of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi, and is a state where the death penalty is used as a tool of repression to silence political opponents and others who the state doesn't like. This isn't just, a little bit grubby. This is a state which, were Britain not to an extent reliant on it economically, that we would regard or suspect as a pariah state.
We don't think that one state's better than another. As a principle, I don't think states should own clubs. But I agree with you, especially states like Saudi Arabia. It's linked to our campaign, but we want to link up with other fan groups on this question of state ownership. That's going to be becoming more and more important. But what you said about the famous cases, is terrible. It happened to Jamal Khashoggi. But as we've got into this, obviously it's opened our eyes more and more to what the situation is in Saudi Arabia. And you see, it's not just the famous cases. It's like exactly what you said. The guys that we've talked to from the human rights organization outside Saudi Arabia, made up of Saudis, they say it's a way to terrorize the population. When they executed 81 people before the Chelsea game, I thought that was quite significant. Basically, it's MBS saying we can do what we like, not really caring about that in that instance about the bad publicity. But when you go into the cases, sometimes we have debates with people on social media about it, and some fans come up. This is a worrying thing. Some of the fans come up and say, "Well, they're criminals, we should be if we executed rapists and murderers in Britain, perhaps it would be a better place." And we say, well, you should try and find out who these people are. A lot of them are young, but a lot of them, from the Shia minority, they're arrested for things like demonstrating, going on a demonstration. And then they're labelled as terrorists. They're not terrorists. We take for granted the rights which governments try to take away in Britain and other European states as well. But we take for granted the right we can go out on the street with a placard and protest or say things on Twitter. But these people are being arrested and then put, most of them are not for capital crimes. In fact, they're being executed. They haven't killed anyone. They're not murderers. They're not rapists, as the sort of propaganda machine says. They're probably just human rights activists, ordinary people demonstrating. So I agree totally with what you're saying. It's on another level. It's on another level. The repression by the Saudi state, and the problem is it's associated with our club now. That's the problem. And as we sort of predicted it, but what they've managed to do is they've managed to get on board a layer of fans who will defend the Saudi state, and that's unacceptable. The other thing is they've neutralized the majority of fans, and it's from basically, our analysis of it would be it's because basically people who should know better, like the ones who run the fanzines and fans groups, but also like political representatives who've been very disappointing in the Northeast. We know some of them are actually season ticket holders, and they're Labour MPs who said previously they're on the left, and they've said nothing, absolutely nothing about it. And so you can see a lot of fans will say, well, why should we do anything? If the people who should be saying things aren't saying anything, so basically they've managed to normalize it. And in a very, very small way, we're not exaggerating our influence, but in a very, very small way, we think that we have to keep going and we have to keep reminding. This weekend, if you've seen the reaction, but it's got publicity. We've got like thousands, I think 50,000 people saw one of the tweets about the letter to Eddie Howe. It's been covered in a lot of places. It's got people talking, and some of the fanzines, people around the fanzines said it's terrible to do it just before the Liverpool match. You shouldn't drag Eddie Howe into it. And there's other people that say, well, is that your red line? Your red line is that Eddie Howe's been asked a question, which he's been legitimately asked a few times. One of the things that we've brought out in this little this weekend is Eddie Howe said after when he became the manager, and he was asked quite legitimately about the Saudi situation, he said he didn't have enough knowledge. Okay, right, but might have been true. Then he said, look, I like to read the Times, I like to read the Guardian. I'll read up on it. Okay, 18 months later, 2 visits to Saudi Arabia. He's took the team twice. Does he not have the knowledge now? Has he not read up enough now to say something? All he needs to do is to say, I personally am against the gross human rights abuses, and I support the right for people for freedom of speech. I support the right for women to criticise the regime, women to fight for their rights. Why would that be such a bad thing? Because if he doesn't say anything, that means that the sportswashing has won. If you silence people, if people think that they can't say anything about the situation in Saudi Arabia, they say, well, what's it got to do with him? Well, he's employed by the Saudi state. It's their money. It's their money. They control 80% of the club, So we think he should say something, And I'm sorry if that upsets people, but, he's the manager of a team which is owned by the Saudi state. That's the way it goes,
John heard, and we have contacted all of the organisations that John mentioned in the course of that interview. None has responded. Newcastle United are far from unique, of course, in welcoming Saudi money. Football's world governing body, FIFA, recently announced that the World Club Cup will be played in the country later this year. Another regime with a dubious human rights record, Qatar, hosted the 2022 World Cup, of course. This, I suspect, is a story that will run and run. Thanks very much indeed for listening. My name is Adrian Goldberg, and if you do want to support our work on the Byline Times podcast, please think about taking out a subscription to the Byline Times, our wonderful monthly newspaper. You get details about how to subscribe at bylinetimes.com. That's at bylinetimes.com. We'll see you again very soon. Cheers now. Bye-bye.